Thank you very much. It is my great honor and distinct pleasure to be here today, back in a room where I took several different classes, actually. But I was asked to come back after last spring. I made a presentation to the Stanford Venture Capital Club, I guess. And I did, as part of that presentation, talking about venture capital, I did my top 10 lies of entrepreneurs and VCs. So I gather the organizers asked me to come back and do an encore performance. But it wasn't, which I'm delighted to do. But it wasn't crystal clear from the title on the program exactly what this session was supposed to be about. So if there is any confusion, why I'm talking about lies, the point of this session is to talk about that process of venture capital where the entrepreneur and the VC get together to talk about raising capital. So there's a lot of discussion in entrepreneurship about building companies and building teams and strategy and all that stuff. Not a lot of discussion about that fairly unique, odd little experience that entrepreneurs have, which is talking to VCs and raising capital and then dealing with the VCs. So in order to try to make somewhat light and interesting of what is otherwise a fairly serious and painful topic, we created at Garage a series of lies that VCs tell entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs tell lies as a way of elucidating the process and trying to talk a little bit about what works and what doesn't work when you're raising capital with venture capitalists. To be more precise, the origin of this particular session was way back when we were starting Garage. I was at a conference, one of those big VC conferences, where you get entrepreneurs on stage and they get 6 minutes to expose their lives to an audience filled with VCs who are passing judgment on them. So you pay thousands of dollars to go to these things. And I was, at that point, I felt like an interloper. I had been an entrepreneur all of my career. I had been on the other side of the table, the guy who stood up there and exposed his life. And now I was in the audience, and I was sitting with the VCs. And I was standing in the back of the room, listening to the entrepreneurs, watching them, feeling their pain. And there in the back of the room next to me were two VCs. And one VC turns to the other, and he says, "How do you know when an entrepreneur is lying?" And the other VC kind of looks at him and goes, "I'm not sure how." And the first VC says, "His lips are moving." So the point is, if you're a VC and you're listening to pitch after pitch after pitch after pitch, in spite of what everybody says about the importance of entrepreneurial passion and enthusiasm and optimism, the reality is investors really don't want to invest in people who are out of touch with reality. And so what happens, however, is all of us who are entrepreneurs and our enthusiasm, we tend to stretch the truth. And by doing so, we lose credibility with investors. And so from an investor point of view, to twist another adage, there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are business plans. And so the point of this presentation is to talk a little bit about typical areas where entrepreneurs tend to go beyond the bounds of appropriate passion and enthusiasm and tend to misrepresent the reality of their business. So with that, let's go through the top 10 lies of entrepreneurs when pitching to venture capitalists. Lie number one is our projections are conservative. So virtually now every entrepreneur has been taught not to say this. But the reality is when you get down and dirty into financial projections, every entrepreneur has to, at some point, they come to that point in the sentence when they say, but there's so many things we can do. I mean, there's so many other markets, there's so many other products. These projections are really, really, and they're trapped at that point, and they look at them, they stand up and they say, conservative, realistic, I really think we can hit them. But the reality is everybody misses their projections. And so on the one hand, and every VC knows you're going to miss your projections. And the point of projections is not to be precise and accurate. The point of projections is to tell the story of your business and what it could be. So on the VC side, we never really expect you to hit the projections. We certainly hope you're going to hit the projections, and we certainly want to understand the logic behind the projections. But the fact that you're an entrepreneur means, by definition, they can't be conservative, because entrepreneurs, by definition, aren't conservative. So don't say our projections are conservative. Line number 2, our market is $56 billion. And again, MBA after MBA, entrepreneur after entrepreneur pulls out statistics from IDC and Frost & Sullivan and all of Gartner Group with these reports that say, hey, by the year 2010, conservatively projecting, this market's going to be $56 billion. But of course, all that shows the investor is that you haven't done good market segmentation. Because certainly no entrepreneur, no startup company is targeting a $56 billion market. Best case, you're going to get some fraction of a percent, and that's not really what business is about. And so what you want to do as an entrepreneur building your business plan is you want to carve up that market and figure out what, in fact, is the subsegment of that market that you're targeting. Because from the point of view of the investor, saying that your market is $56 billion means that you don't really understand the narrow specifics of your market and the opportunity that you're targeting. Line number 3, our contract with Cisco, Microsoft, Oracle, whatever, our contract is going to be signed next week. So one of the dirty little secrets about the venture capital funding process is that when you walk in and you pitch an investor, you're not going to get a check that day. It's going to be an extended process. In fact, it's going to be months, not just weeks, between the time that you meet with the investor and the time that they're actually going to close the deal. So anything you say to an investor about something that's going to happen within the next 6 months had better happen. It damn sure better happen. But in all of your enthusiasm, because you've got a contract in legal at Cisco, you want to share this wondrous story of how you're about to close Cisco, right? But inevitably, it's going to get, quote, hung up in legal, or somebody's going to go on vacation, or something like that. And you have just said to the VC last week, our contract's going to close, next week. 2 weeks later, they finally get around to following up, and they say, oh, yeah, that contract that closed last week, how's it going? Well, and so all of a sudden, you've blown your credibility again. Because in the space of 1 week, you've already failed to live up to your projections. If you can't hit a 1 week deadline, how the hell are you going to hit a 5-year deadline, right? So if you've got a lot of great stuff going on while you're talking with the investors, play it low key. Only talk about the stuff that you've actually accomplished. Thrill the investors with what you have in fact accomplished to date, and then in the weeks that follow, surprise them, delight them with the news that you've closed a new contract. You've got another customer, you've got a beta, you've hired some, wondrous talent. Don't promise things unless you're absolutely sure that you're going to deliver it. Line number 4, if we only sell 40% of the company, we'll still have control. One of the big concerns entrepreneurs have is the structure of the cap table. They're anxious about, kind of, at what point can those investors wake up on the wrong side of bed and decide to throw my ass out of here? And, it's a reasonable concern, but the assumption then happens sort of outside the VC room. The VCs aren't in the room, and the entrepreneurs are sitting there looking at term sheets or thinking about valuation issues, and they're thinking to themselves, well, as long as we don't sell 51% of the company, we'll still control this company. 2 big problems with that. One, it's wrong. As soon as you sell a single share of stock to somebody else, you have a fiduciary responsibility to other people. So that's just sort of basic law. But the second issue is that this raises a huge red flag for investors. If you're concerned about control, if you have a point of view starting at the beginning that you have an adversarial relation with your investors, and it somehow gets communicated this way, through this issue of control or percentage ownership, it doesn't set up a lovely relationship with your investors. So first of all, if you are anxious about control, then you got to make sure you work with investors that you like to work with. People who have a reputation for integrity, honesty, being straight with you, who aren't going to screw you. But you got to pay attention to the fact that it's not about the percentage of the cap table. It's about your relationship with your investors and your performance as an entrepreneur. Line number 5. There's no competition in our space. We hear all sorts of variations on this particular theme. One is there's no direct competitor. The other famous one is no one else can do what we can do. So that's a form of non-competition, I suppose. The question, of course, is do you understand what competition means when you're building a business? There's no competition in our space implies that nobody's doing what your solution promises to do. Because if somebody is doing it, then there's an alternative to your solution. And if there's an alternative to your solution, then of course there's competition. It's that alternative. Usually and frequently, for early stage companies, that alternative is the status quo. It's either doing it yourself or using an old technology to do it. But if you have a value proposition, whether it's to speed up the infrastructure of an enterprise network, or if it's to offer messaging over mobile phones to consumers, there are other solutions out there that may not use your technology, but they're an alternative solution to achieve the same value proposition. So when people say there's no competition, we have one of two reactions. Either, maybe indeed, nobody on the face of the planet has ever done this before, in which case it's probably not that interesting. It's probably a classic example of a technology in search of a solution, and that's not too interesting. Or the entrepreneur gets up there and says there's no competition, when in fact, a couple of minutes on Google would reveal there's all sorts of competition, and then we realize the entrepreneur is a bozo. And that's not conducive to raising capital either. So make sure, no matter what, when you're talking about the competitive environment, at least you acknowledge the status quo. At least you acknowledge the home brew solution or whatever the alternatives are as a way of explaining how you're going to compete in the marketplace and what your competitive advantage is. Line number 6. We've assembled a world-class team. Now, every once in a while this is true, but even for great experienced serial entrepreneurs, at the early stage, it's pretty much impossible to have assembled a world-class team. But again, every entrepreneur wants to be thrilled with their partners and wants to show the love that they've got for the team that they've assembled. And so you're sitting in the conference room with, their roommate, the engineer, and their wife's brother, who is the sales guy. And, you're standing up there and saying, we've got a world-class team. And they may be great people, and they may be perfect for the stage of the company. But they're probably not a world-class team, and they're probably people who are not going to be the senior executives 2 or 3 or 4 years from now, assuming you're successful. And so I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't be delighted with the team you have, but I'm suggesting it's important to be realistic about the need to evolve teams over time. And that may include you yourself independently as an entrepreneur. You may be absolutely the right person to start this company up, but over time, you may take a different role, an appropriate role in the company as it grows. Excuse me. Line number 7. Our sales cycle is 3 to 6 months. And that's conservative, by the way. So, this is probably the single biggest problem in hitting financial projections, hitting goals and objectives for companies. Everybody gets this wrong, and I don't know why that is. You hear the examples, of course. Every once in a while, they're famous. They're on the covers of magazines because they actually meet their plans, right? There are very few companies that actually hit their sales plans, and that's because entrepreneurs, people generally misestimate the sales cycle. And one of the reasons this happens, and having been through this myself, is you're sitting there, you're trying to plan out the operating plan for the year, and you're looking at your pipeline and the customers you've got going, and you're looking at your products and all that, and you're saying to yourself, okay, let's look at the last 10 deals we closed. Well, we look at the last 10 deals we closed, and they closed on average in 45, 50 days, and so, we've got data. We've got data that shows that on average, we close our deals in 45, 50 days, so let's hedge that a little, we'll say 3 to 6 months, right? But statistically and in the real world, what really has happened is you've got 10 deals you've closed, and you've got another 40 deals that you haven't closed, right? It's the rest of the pipeline. Hopefully, God bless you, you have 40 more deals on your pipeline. But all of those 40 deals haven't been averaged in to that 45, 50-day calculation. So you're off by that factor, right? However long it's going to take to close all those guys actually has to be averaged in. And so, again, it varies from business to business. But unfortunately, the way the calendar works, the way humans work, it's really, really hard for anybody to get a contract signed by an organization in less than a 6-month period. And usually, when just looking out there at different businesses, particularly if you're selling to companies, the time from the very first meeting, if you're time from a very first meeting through all the evaluation, through God bless it, you got a pilot, God bless it, you got the CIO's got to sign off before you're going to plug this thing into anything, and God bless you, legal gets through it in less than 30 days, right? It adds up 9, 12 months minimum to get these sorts of things done. But it's really hard when you're putting together the operating plan or the business plan forecast to admit that it's going to take 12 months on average to close each of these deals. So be very cautious about this and be able to explain how it is that your sales cycle is going to evolve in your particular business. Ideally, somebody on your team has had a lot of experience selling into your market and has a lot of real-world experience on what all of the elements of sales are. But frequently, and this is one of the biggest issues facing a lot of companies, even facing the MBA curriculum, I think, is that the discipline of sales and sales processes are not well taught, well understood, and well managed in most startup companies. Line number 8, we have the first mover advantage. So this was particularly exciting during the bubble. I noticed, it kind of disappeared when the bubble burst, this phrase, but I noticed it's coming back. It's coming back particularly in Web, all these Web 2.0 things, because with Web 2.0, it's really easy to get something up and running, and, so the game is who gets the critical mass and the buzz and, the Mentos video first, right? And so it feels as though, and I've even, read books by credible authors about, the importance of first mover advantage. And, in some cases it's taught in the curriculum about, the importance of being first. And that is the basis of market share. And market share is the basis of the experience curve. And the experience curve is the basis of competitive advantage. And so first mover advantage is, historically it's an important thing. But the reality in startup companies, technology-based startup companies, is there's a whole bunch of stuff that can go wrong if you're the first mover. First of all, generally the first guys to have the clever idea that once the technology is good enough to enable you to do something interesting like integrated messaging systems using your cell phone or something. The problem, though, is you've got the first generation of technology protocols that are going to be, they're not quite stitched together all that well, and they're still pretty expensive, and you got a lot of heterogeneity in the system, not a lot of standardization. And so frequently, the first movers are the guys that spend the most money trying to get to market, and at the end of the day, they wind up having a mediocre solution. And so they spend a lot of money, take a number of years for enabling the market to figure out how do we really want to do this thing that these guys have invented, and then a whole bunch of other guys come along, swoop in, take over the market. And so you see that time and time again in the VC marketplace. So when an entrepreneur gets up and says, we're going to be the first movers, that's a red flag to us. because we're thinking to ourselves, well, first of all, are they really the first movers? And probably they aren't, because probably we've already seen 4, 5, 6 other teams that may or may not be in stealth who are doing exactly the same thing. But secondly, the question is, can they really get to market and stay ahead of the curve? Or are you going to wind up building a solution on a platform of code that's going to be obsolete in 18 months? And the guys that come along in 18 months, using the next generation protocols, the next generation standards, they're going to be able to get to market with a solution that's even better than yours in 5 weeks from the time of introduction. And you're going to be scrambling because you're going to have to rewrite your entire code base from scratch. So it isn't necessarily the most compelling business idea to be the first guy to create a solution once a solution becomes technically possible. So that's I got to tell you, having been on the entrepreneur side of this, that's a tough one, because once you have the idea, you're standing there in the shower thinking to yourself, this is a great idea, right? And nobody else has done this yet. Wouldn't it be cool to be the first guys to go do this? And that probably can make sense. You just got to think through, do you have the resources and the staying power to be the first guy out there, and then to also be the fast follower, to quickly cannibalize what you've learned and get a new solution out there before everybody else leapfrogs ahead of you. Lie number 9, all we have to do is get 2% of the market, right? So this is the corollary of our market is 56 billion, right? So you segment your market carefully and you identify all the possibilities. After all, there are now 2 billion cell phones on the planet, right? Selling at close to $1 billion a year. So, boy, 2 billion cell phones, and all of them can receive a text message, right? So let's see. It's certainly possible for me to get to a couple of 100 million cell phones. That'd be pretty easy to do, wouldn't it? I mean, it's not that many. So it's really easy to talk yourself into this sort of rule of large numbers that says there's so much stuff out there and there's so many people doing things in this space. MySpace is the other favorite. If I could just get a few people to start a viral kind of adoption of this widget on MySpace, it's a piece of cake for me to have 10 million people implant my widget on their MySpace page. I mean, of course, that's easy to do, right? So the point is you get wrapped up in how many people and how many dollars and how many potential customers there are for a given solution. And there you are looking at your Excel spreadsheet. And you're thinking to yourself, I can't go to these VCs and tell them we're going to be $2 billion in year 3, right? Because it's unrealistic to be $2 billion in year 3, but at $2 billion, that's only 10% of the market, right? So, so we'll be conservative and we'll cut it back. Well, the problem there is not that you've been optimistic about your market share. The problem is that you've misdefined the market that you're going after. There's a very narrow, for most applications, there is in fact a very narrow customer base that you really can go after who are likely to adopt it within any sort of realistic time frame. So it's about narrowing your target market, of which you will then have a significant percentage, rather than taking a big market and saying, we're going to start year 1, we think we should be able to get 0.1% of the market. And that's, a $5 million company, right? So we see this all the time. You don't want to take an arbitrarily large market and then do a bottoms-up assumption on how you're going to generate revenue. What you want to do is you want to isolate the target prospects for your business. Think about, specifically who are the customers who might buy your product in the first 24 months. And if you're selling into business, you should be able to name them and figure out, or if you're selling into a consumer market, you should be able to identify the channel, by channels, who you're going to get to. Can you realistically get into Best Buy in the first 12 months of being a business? Or whatever. I don't know. Pick your market, take it apart, deconstruct it, and then figure out bottoms up, sales call by sales call, marketing campaign by marketing campaign, realistically, how are you going to build up these numbers against what market are you targeting? So if you say all you need is 2% of the market, as an investor, we say, well, either you don't understand your market or we want to go after the company that's going after the other 98%. And then line number 10 is, I'll be happy to hand over the reins to a new CEO. And this goes back, to your world-class team, and it goes back to you as an individual entrepreneur as well. That, again, most entrepreneurs now have been coached well enough to know that at some point in time, maybe they're not the right CEO for this company. The issue that investors have is when the entrepreneur says this, are they in fact sincere, or is in fact what the entrepreneur saying in subtext, I will hand over the reins to a new CEO if that new CEO is the right CEO for my company, right? And that's just a big red flag. If you think it's your company, then we're likely to have a problem. That is a concern for investors because it is not your company. It is our company. It includes the rest of the management team. It includes the rest of the investors. It includes all the employees. It has to be a team effort. If you have an egocentric perspective that this is your baby and your baby alone, and it's your job as steward of this baby to make sure that you are the one who decides who the right CEO is for the company, you're likely to butt heads, not just with your investors, but with the other people on your management team. So this is a way that investors can suss out, what is the real ego involvement of the entrepreneur in this particular company. So those are the top 10 lies of entrepreneurs. I guess the question is whether it's worth taking some questions now, or should I dive into to the other side of the coin and take questions at the end. So anybody sitting here with an absolutely burning, pressing, got to have it answered now kind of question, or shall I go on to the top 10 lies of VCs? Okay, in that case, I will go on to the top 10 lies of venture capitalists. But first, if I may. By the way, while I'm catching my breath, my dear friend here, Larry Kubal, you were also Stanford, right?
Yes.
Okay. Was suggesting to me that I have not completed the 4-square matrix here. So we have entrepreneurs lying to VCs, and we have VCs lying to entrepreneurs. But as Larry points out, being a VC at a firm called Labrador, there's another dimension to this, which is VCs lying to VCs, which is, extremely common, if someday somebody's going to write the expose, they're going to get into somebody's email box and all the pitches VCs send to VCs about their, oh, wow, I found a great investment. And, we put the seed money into this company, and it's going to be a rocket. And because you're my dearest friend on earth, I want to let you in on this deal.
The top one is, I like the way you think.
Great. So Larry, what did you think of that presentation? So, in any case, top 10 lies of venture capitalists. And again, so here we are in this surreal world. You as an entrepreneur trying to build a company, and you're really focused on the important stuff, right? Getting products that work and understanding the market and lining up customers and building a team. And then you've got these other people you got to deal with, these guys called venture capitalists, and they're kind of a different breed. They're not like your customers. I mean, your customers, you know how to talk to customers. But these VCs, they don't react the same way as customers, and it's hard to understand what's really going on in their heads. And so the point of this presentation is to provide a guide to the language and culture of venture capital. It's sort of a different world you're going into, and it's valuable to understand what it is VCs are saying when they say things like, I like the way you think. So what do you really mean, Larry, when you say, I like the way you think? Huh?
I want to say in the game.
Okay. Kind of like, I'm not exactly sure I understand what you're saying, but, unless I'm nice to you, I won't hear anything more, right?
You're holding my options.
Right. So, okay. So with that, let me share with you our particular perspective on the top 10 lies of VCs. And by the way, I should assure you, it was really hard work, distilling down from the hundreds and hundreds of possible lies. But what happened, in fact, was, I had developed this top 10 lies of entrepreneurs thing based upon that conference I went to. And we gave it, in a few cases, and it actually wound up getting published in the Harvard Business Review. And then someone said, well, wait a second, how come you're not, giving equal time to the VCs? And so Guy came up with this idea, we got to have top 10 lies of VCs, and we sat down and, we went through all these things that we said to entrepreneurs and that we've heard other people say to entrepreneurs over the years as entrepreneurs and sitting on that side of the table. And so with that, tried to do our best to distill it down to the top 10. So lie number 1, we like to move quickly, And, so again, you go in, you pitch to the VCs, and they'll tell you how they're streamlined to make quick decisions. And, the partners, let's see, it's Friday, the partners meet Monday. Boy, you should have a check by Tuesday is the impression, they almost give. And the reality is, one, VCs are people too, and they overpromise and underdeliver as a rule. But the dirty little secret underlying this particular point is the process really does take a long time. It does take months, generally, from sort of the initial contact to closing the deal. And part of that is because it's extremely valuable to the investors to watch how you and your team perform over the period of negotiation with the VCs. So it's, we have this inside garage I'll be disclosing here. And I probably shouldn't be, but I will. And so we refer to deals as either microwave or slow bake. And sometimes you get a deal and you say, okay, maybe this is a microwave kind of deal. 60 seconds, boom, we want to cook it and we want to make it happen. And generally, from a VC point of view, it's a microwave deal if you're afraid that if you don't move quickly, something bad will happen. And usually the something bad that will happen is somebody else will take the deal, right? Or this, sometimes we're more altruistic than that, and we say, if we don't move quickly, then we won't get the market opportunity. We won't be able to take advantage of the market opportunity quickly enough. But that's extremely rare. Almost every deal in the venture capital community can be a slow bake. And the reason slow bake is good for the investor is, again, they get to see how things evolve over the weeks and months that pass. So when you go in, you pitch a VC, and they say, we like to move quickly, be very, very realistic about this and understand that it's going to be multi weeks, if not multiple months in the process, and that everything you do in that process is being evaluated. It's not just about what's written on paper or what was on your slide presentation. It's about your performance. It's about when and how you return calls. It's about the quality of your emails. It's about whether you actually deliver on what you said you would do the prior week. All of these signals as to the quality of you and your team as an entrepreneurial team really, really matter. And that's part of the data that's being gathered. Yeah, they talk about the formal due diligence process, and they have lawyers that look at contracts and they look at your patent applications, but that stuff is really less important than how you're behaving over that period of weeks. VC lie number 2. We're value-added investors. We can really help you build your company. What they're really saying is, because we're such great guys and such a great team, we have such a great network, you, of course, should take a lower price in the valuation of your company. You don't want dumb money, right? You don't want dumb money. You want a value-added investor. Surely anybody who bids higher for your equity than we bid, must be dumb money, right? Kind of by definition. So we're value-added investors is all about saying, we are going to help you with more than just money. Now, I don't mean to suggest that VCs aren't value-added investors. Labrador Ventures, for example, is an extraordinarily capable venture fund in terms of helping companies build their companies, right? Helping entrepreneurs build their companies. But when you're in a meeting before they've invested and they say this, part of what they're setting you up for is when and if we give you a term sheet and you notice that our pre-money valuation is lower than some other firm's pre-money valuation, the reason for that is that we're going to make you richer because we're value-added investors. So that's the subtext of that particular statement. Corollary to that is we have a great network, part of being a value-added investor. And when you probe down into that, what you find out is that network includes things like my son plays baseball with Scott McNeely's son. Line number 4, I really like your company. I just couldn't convince my partners. Basically what they're saying is, I don't want to have to admit to you that I just wasted a bunch of your time going through this process. It is, in all fairness to venture capitalists, it's a very challenging process that you see a great team with a great idea with a lot of energy and a lot of potential, but the challenge for entrepreneurs is not proving that you have a good idea that could generate a lot of money. The reality is that's not the proof point. That's not what you're trying to convince the investors. What you're trying to convince the investors is that you're the best next investment for their fund. And that's a very different sales proposition than proving that you're a good idea. And the problem for you, unlike selling to a customer, if you're selling to a customer, you know exactly what the alternatives are, right? Don't buy the Cisco router, buy our router, because our router spec, benefit. You can sell against the known competition when you're selling to customers. When you're selling to VCs, you don't know what the competition is, right? You don't know what other term sheets they have out or who else they're talking to. And so there you are thinking that you've got a great, brilliant idea, and you've actually got a partner who probably is genuinely enthusiastic about your company, but it may be that you're number 4 on their list. Being number 4 on the list is not at all bad. It's just not good enough to get a term sheet. And so on some Monday morning meeting with the partners, they sit down and they say, yeah, that team that came in, really, really interesting. Let's keep looking at them. But no, we're not going to deliver a term sheet. And this guy comes back to you and says, how I said I thought I could have a term sheet by September. Let's see, it's January. Yeah, I really want, but it was my partners who wouldn't let me do it. So that's what the dynamic that's really going on behind the scenes. Line number 5, we like to syndicate. What that means is if Sequoia gets excited about this, we'll be happy to come in. So again, this is a little unfair to the VCs because VCs, in fact, do like to and need to syndicate. But there's a difference between a VC that is happy to take the lead and drive the process versus a VC that says to you, if you find a lead, let us know, right? So if the VC says to you, if you find a lead investor, let us know, what that VC is telling you in very clear, distinct language is, no, we're not investing, right? So on the other hand, if a VC says, we like to syndicate, and you say, great, who are your best friends? And they say, I'm going to call up, Larry and Ho and Tim, this afternoon, and we'll get together, and we're going to put this together. That's very different. If they're actually going to do the work to build the syndicate, that's a great thing. It's a great thing if you get a lead investor who's going to sell your deal to other VCs. If you've got an investor who says they're enthusiastic, but is not willing to sell your deal to other VCs, then they're not a qualified investor for your company. Line number 6, we need to see a little more traction. This is a famous one. Again, what the investor is really saying is, we're not going to invest. But, as Larry pointed out, I don't want to close off my options because I really like the way you think. I don't want to close off my options. This may be an interesting deal. Let's stay in touch, which is a way of saying report back to us on a weekly basis what sort of progress you're getting. So the challenge for the VCs, again, as I learned to appreciate after cutting over to the other side, the dark side, as they say, is that every good deal every good deal in the history of venture capital was once a bad deal, right? Yahoo was a really stupid idea for the first 24 investors that looked at it. Nobody would invest in YouTube when the guys first launched YouTube, right? Nobody would invest in, pick a company, right? Every successful company was a bad idea to a large number of investors, and then something clicked. Usually, rarely was it that, magically the right investor came along and the clouds parted, and the heavenly chorus explained the brilliance of the business idea to that particular investor. That's rarely kind of the way the dynamic really works. Usually what happens is the team gets rejected, and they tweak the model, and they work a little harder, and they seek out advice, and then they get rejected again, and then they tweak the model, and they seek out advice, and they build a team, and then they get rejected again, and then finally, after 12 or 14 tweaks, they click on something. Something happens, and they get a beta test at some company, or some advisor comes in and opens up the door to some big company. Something happens that changes the optics of the deal, and then all of a sudden the investors have a different perspective on this deal. So the challenge for entrepreneurs is having the staying power to do 12 to 14 iterations before you get it right. And then what every investor knows is after the money goes in, you're going to have to go through at least 2 or 3 iterations, one more, again, before you get it right. But as an investor, you want to see the first 12 or 14 done on somebody else's nickel. You don't want the first 12 to 14 done on your nickel. So that's why investors say we need to see a little more traction, and why it's perfectly legitimate for you to both hear it as a no, but if in fact you can tweak it and change your model, go back and find out if they're going to say something more substantive. Line number 7, we invest in teams. What they're really saying is, assuming the technology works and assuming this is a huge market, we invest in teams, right? And what the investors want you to know is, you hear this all the time on these panels, is that the success of a company is a function of the team. Does the team have the flexibility and the knowledge and the domain experience and the talent and the right ego and the right confidence to evolve a business into a successful business? Teams are in fact critical. But part of what the investors are saying to you when they say we invest in teams is they're trying to give you comfort that we think you're the right team. And again, they may in fact think you're the right team for exactly this moment in the company, except for the fact that as soon as the money goes in, we got to go hire a new COO because your roommate just doesn't quite cut it. He may be a good coder, but he's not a COO. And then we got to go hire a guy who's really a VP of engineering, who really has experience, develop big products, on time, on budget. But for right now, today, this week, the team, is the right team. So from an investor point of view, we're not expecting the team to be the complete team when we write the check. But we are expecting that the team works effectively together, that you're perfectly capable of living on rice cakes and Mountain Dew for an indefinite period of time, and most importantly, that you're capable of attracting high-quality successors to each of you in your positions. It's that issue of, is there a dynamic here, this combination of excitement and opportunity and capability and competence that will make other people want to jump on this team, that will make very talented people give up their options in another company and give up a higher salary to come take advantage of this opportunity. That's what we're looking at when we talk about investing in teams. Line number 8, the board meeting. So from now on, I guess the next 3 lies are sort of post-investment lies, okay? So imagine you actually got through the hurdle, and now we're at the board meeting. And at the board meeting, one of your investors says, when we were doing this at Cisco, watch out. What that really means is all I've got is a hammer, and you're looking like a nail to me. The adage about if all you've got is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And there is a challenge. There is a challenge in the VC community that a lot of us come from very specific backgrounds. I come from a software background, and so a lot of my experience and a lot of my scars have to do with getting software out into a market through channels, to customers, big sales, small sales, channel sales, all that stuff. On time, on budget, hitting plan. So I've got all of this historical experience in my brain that filters every problem I see when I'm sitting on a board. And so the challenge you've got as an entrepreneur is you've got this entrepreneur who made this venture capitalist who made millions of dollars because he was employee number 785 at Cisco. So employee number 785 at Cisco made millions of dollars. That's pretty cool, right? And this guy thinks he was there, and what he'll say is, I was there at the beginning, right? I was employee number 785, right? And so they tend to assume that gives them wisdom about startup experience, right? So I really don't mean to pick on ex-Cisco people. I apologize if there's anybody here who made millions of dollars in Cisco. But in any case, there is this tendency for VCs to have a certain perspective. It's one of the most important reasons to have more than one investor in your company. And what sometimes happens that is a challenge for entrepreneurs, sometimes they get a sole investor, whether it's a VC or an angel, a sole investor as the investor in their company. And if you can do something to counter that, I strongly urge it, because there is a tendency, if you have a sole investor, for that person to say, this is my money, and I know how to do things the right way, and let me tell you how to do them. So you got to watch out for this particular VC. Lie number 9 is you're at the board meeting, things aren't quite going right, but you haven't spent a lot of time talking with your investors on this, and at the board meeting, the investor says, you should lean on us for help. And the challenge you've got there is, what the VC is really saying is, I don't know what's going wrong here. I don't understand what's going wrong. Otherwise, I would have told you what you should have done right. But if they say you should lean on your board, it means I don't have the answer, but we need to spend more time trying to figure out what's going wrong and how to get to the right answer. Line number 10 is, and line number 10 is good work. And what that means is, I'm probably not going to fire you this week. So again, the challenge for entrepreneurs and investors is, if you make the quarter, that's great. But if you miss the next quarter, I don't care if you made the last quarter. What I care about is that you missed the next quarter. And that's the challenge that investors have. So understand, again, the culture of the VC, who is reporting back to his partners each quarter on the performance of the companies that he's watching over. And you go back into your partners' meetings and you talk about, well, there's this challenge and there's that challenge. And no matter what the facts and circumstances, one of your partners is going to say, well, is that guy the right CEO? Should we be thinking about a change, right? And so that's the problem for the VCs, is that VCs are all taught that fundamentally their sole responsibility for managing an investment is the decision of the CEO and when to fire the CEO. So it's all about, should we make a change in the CEO position? And it's a perfectly legitimate model for board governance and board dynamics. But the challenge for an entrepreneur is, once you take investors on, once you take on a board, it's that board's responsibility to evaluate you continuously. And so if you do perform well, that's great. Keep up the good work. If things are going wrong, you have to be aware of the fact that the board is going to be thinking at some point, maybe it's time for a change. And so what a lot of entrepreneurs do is they then hunker down. And that's not necessarily the best solution. The entrepreneurs that survive the process are the entrepreneurs that open up and they reach out. And if something is going wrong, instead of ducking it and saying, let's have fewer board meetings this year, why don't we just have a board meeting every 6 months? That's a natural entrepreneur instinct, right? Instead of doing that, you go out to lunch with each one of your investors. And you lay out what's happening, and you talk about what you've done and what you've accomplished, and you talk about what you identify as the challenges. And you say what you want to make sure all of your investors know and all of your board members know is that you do understand what the challenges are, and you do have a plan on how to address them, and you've got the team lined up, and you are taking action. As soon as a board sees or investors see that you're trying to duck responsibility, you're trying to duck a communications role, then they get scareder and scareder, and you create this vicious cycle of antagonism between the entrepreneur and the board as opposed to collaboration between the entrepreneur and the board. So I use this as tongue-in-cheek around a very serious issue about communication with boards. And again, every entrepreneur is taught when they start a board that the most important thing to do with the board is not surprise the board, right? You never surprise the board. If someone walks into a board meeting and hears bad news for the first time, that's a bad thing. Because what they want to know the bad news before the board, and they want to know that there's going to be a discussion of how to address the bad news, not a communication that there is bad news. So as an entrepreneur, as a manager, your job is to make sure that all the communication gets to the board early as soon as possible. You never want a board member to hear bad news from someone else. And that as quickly as you can, you have reached out to try to find alternate solutions or suggestions, and that you, as the senior manager in the company, have these proposals or plans in place as to how to address it. Even if the plan is simply a plan to figure out how to address the problem, it's better than avoiding the problem altogether or just sitting there saying, we missed the quarter. I guess we'll just have to try harder next quarter, right? You better explain why you missed the quarter. You better explain how you're going to try harder, what you're going to change about your business. Otherwise, you're going to lose the confidence of your investors. So, in all seriousness and all humor, those are the top 10 lies of venture capitalists. Again, I don't know if I did send some slides. I don't know if they're available on some website or not. But if you want the slides, just send me an email at reichert@garage.com. You can find them there. If you have comments, questions, follow-up, thoughts, whatever, you can also get me at my email address. We also, on our website, have some other stuff for entrepreneurs. We have a guide on how to write a compelling executive summary. We have a guide on perfecting your pitch. We have a few other things, some of Guy Kawasaki's speeches. And then Guy, my partner, has also written a book called The Art of the Start, which is a compilation of everything we've learned in the 8 years of Garage. And he maintains a blog, which he has recently renamed How to Change the World. You'll be stunned to know, you heard it here first, that will be the title of his next book, probably. So he figures if he just writes a blog a day for, some period of time, eventually he'll have enough words for a book. And so that makes it a lot easier than sitting down and actually writing a book. But so with that having been said, any questions, any comments? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so having done probably 8.5, 10 lies, I'll work on the other half, 1.5.
I want to understand how you have a half a lie.
Later.
Okay.
One question I had was about in the business plan when you're doing the projections. I've done a number of pitches, and I've been given advice before to kind of pump up the projections by about 20% because the VC is going to cut them back anyways. And I actually tried once to do what I called a realistic plan with the longer sales cycles and so forth. Right. And the plan, those plans just kind of hit the ground with a thud. I mean, there seems to be this dynamic, and I'm just wondering, do you have any advice about how to break through that, where somebody's expecting to be pumped up, somebody's going to automatically cut it down, and how do you get to the truth?
Right. Well, so again, I mean, every situation varies, and there's even within my partnership, we have controversies around this topic. But my experience is that Excel, the spreadsheet, should putting in what you think is realistic, even with 6-month, 9-month, 12-month sales cycles, you should discover miraculously that it's still a huge business, right? If it isn't a huge business, even with quote unquote realistic assumptions, then you got to drill in and understand. Maybe in fact it is going to take more work, and maybe in fact you got to figure out is your pricing wrong? Is your market penetration wrong? I mean, is it going to take more capital to get to a bigger business than I would like? So it's not usually the problem that even when you tailor back the numbers, that the numbers look totally uninteresting, right? Now, to get to the rules of thumb, right? Everybody wants to know, is it true that I have to have $100 million on my revenue line somewhere in my financial projections? And I would say that the answer to that is, unfortunately, yes, that is generally true. Is it likely that you will, in fact, hit the $100 million, within 5? And so generally, that's the 5th-year projection. And the reason that entrepreneurs do 5 years of projections is that it's just not realistic to get to 100 million in anything less than 5 years. So the other reason, by the way, to do 5 years of projections is, and this is where Guy and I differ, Guy's attitude is, we know they're lying, so why do we even bother asking for 5 years? And my point is, well, of course they're not right, but you got to give the company, you got to give the entrepreneur enough space to flesh out the company, to actually explain how the company is going to evolve. Because the first 24 months are one product, one market. That's just the reality of a business. You can't get to more than one product, one market in the first 24 months. So you want to understand what the team is thinking in terms of the next market and the next product, and that means you got to go 3, 4, 5 years. But the other good reason to go to 5 years is it gives you the chance to get to 100 million. And I hate saying it cavalierly that you got to figure out a way to get to 100 million. I don't know the case in this business, but there are some circumstances, though, where getting to 40, 50, 60 million is perfectly fine. If you can get there and you're still growing fast and you're obscenely profitable, truly profitable, as opposed to Excel profitable, right? Then you can get a $500 million valuation on a company like that. So from a VC's point of view, hey, if I can get comfort that there's at least 100 to 200 million exit here and the possibility of upside to that, and I've got a reasonably sized fund, then I can be excited around a company like that. So that's what's going on in the VC's head, is what can my exit look like? And so the gamesmanship, though, is as soon as I see a yellow flag around your projections, then I start carving back. As soon as I think you're being somewhat unrealistic, then I assume you're somewhat unrealistic across a whole bunch of stuff, and I just keep carving back. So if I believe you're being realistic, and if I believe that there might possibly be some upside, I'm not going to carve back. So that's the game. That is the game you're playing. If I have any suggestion, if there's any suggestion you pumped up the numbers, then that's the last meeting. I mean, there's so much room in the marketplace for successful companies that to have to pump numbers is like, forget it. Why would I bother, right? So, hopefully that helped. I don't know. Yes?
One thing that you didn't cover in the very presentation was more also about how much the investors want versus how much entrepreneurs are seeking and what target percentage ownership, those kind of issues that get involved.
Right.
And kind of how the VCs think about that. And,
right.
How there usually are mismatches between entrepreneurs and VCs on those kind of issues.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the important dynamics in the venture capital world is that funds have gotten bigger and bigger. And meaning, they have more and more money to put to work, and there aren't necessarily more good deals or good opportunities. But as a result, you are seeing VCs sort of pushing out at the edges and going international and going into clean tech and all that sort of stuff, because they're trying to find places to put money to work. But one of the challenges, for any given entrepreneur is, I'm a fund, I'm a $400 million fund. I see your particular business plan. I want, in any given situation, I would like the opportunity to make my fund on my investment in your company, right? Meaning, I want $400 million back out of investing in you. And so then you get the math working, which is, what's the possible exit? Well, there are very few billion-dollar exits in this world, right? And so I'm going to hope, God bless, everything goes right. You're a $500 million exit. I can't make the math work, right? I got to own 90% of you, 80% of you to get a $500 million exit. That dog don't hunt. So that's the pressure. That's the pressure I've got as an investor to want a larger percentage of your company, because I'm looking at possible exits and how much it can contribute to my fund, and so I want a larger percentage of your company. The counter pressure is I want the team to be motivated to build a great company. So I'm always going to work the angles to make sure that the right 3, 4, 5 guys in the team see a window for becoming obscenely rich. So I'm going to keep carving out enough options. But of course the guys, the founders, if they're not adding value anymore and they're sitting off in the corner somewhere, well, they got their founder stock and that's that. I'm not that worried about them if they're not contributing anymore. And the earlier investors, I'm not that worried about them either, right? But I am worried about the key management, and I'm also worried, the other piece I'm worried about is my syndicate partners, right? So I want to maximize my ownership interest, but I also want to attract a syndicate partner alongside me because I don't want to have to carry this company myself. So I've got to carve enough out for my syndicate partner. So you see companies getting recarved with every round of investment. The first round is generally pretty easy, right? Because you're asking for a modest amount of money, and there's plenty of room in the cap table for the investors to own 40% of the company, and everybody else, the founders own 60% of the company, and you got $4 million, and kumbaya, everybody's happy, right? But things go wrong. There's a down round. You bring in some more investors. That's when things get really dicey, and you see these horrible cap tables where the founders have been almost washed out, and the seed investors, the angels, are getting screwed, and but there's no. I wouldn't say there's any hard and fast rule because there's so many different scenarios. There are some companies, very few, that all they need is one round of investment. There are other companies, that are perfectly successful companies, but they're in their Series F. So you can have a successful company that takes a lot of capital, but it's going to squeeze down the percentages over time. So did that adequately duck your question?
I guess the key part would just be, is there a minimum percentage that they would take, or is there a minimum investment amount where you get to the point that you go, this is not of interest to us, basically?
Yeah, any venture capital fund will tell you that the minimum they'll take is 20%. So, the argument is if you don't have at least 20%, then it's not worth the bandwidth, it's not worth the attention, it's not going to make a dent, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm seeing, and Larry and anybody else who's a VC, tell me if you see something different. More and more now I'm seeing the VC saying the minimum is 25%. Got one VC that said our minimum is 30% for a Series A deal. I mean, are you seeing minimums go up?
I think so. At the same time, I'm seeing more angel-type deals getting done. I mean, the angels are sort of coming back. And some very small funds that are willing to do the angel sort of seed startup money. But for Series A, I totally agree that the minimums are going up, especially for the larger funds.
For the institutions, right. And that's a really important point. There is a whole community of investors out there that is somewhat different than what I was speaking of, which are angels and angel funds. Sophisticated executives who are now turning into angel investors. In some cases they're a little less sophisticated, but they're really rich. You got to be careful. In some cases, it's a small fund that is basically their money, or their money and some other friends, and angel money. And those investors have some different behaviors. And they can be a great way to get started. Particularly if they have a particular expertise that they can use to help your company. Yeah.
With Opus Capital, I just want to add, when you're looking for funding and you know how much money you're looking to take, and if you know it's not too capital intensive, then choose an appropriately sized firm in terms of the fund size, because the dynamics are going to play accordingly.
Right.
Corroborating what you're saying.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's we as a small fund strongly endorse that point of view. And we see teams all the time that just came back from, XYZ big billion-dollar fund on Sand Hill Road, who, they can't believe when they walked out of the meeting, the VC said, "You're not asking for enough money," and that seemed counterintuitive to the entrepreneurs. I mean, I thought we were supposed to be lean and mean and efficient and all that stuff, but there is this countervailing pressure. So, yeah, thank you for that point. Yes?
Are you seeing entrepreneurs come to you saying things, kind of back on the projections question, saying stuff like, well, revenue generation isn't really a core competency for a consumer internet company that's looking to show hockey stick type growth. So really the exit is based on traffic. And how important are these types of revenue projections in that scenario?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we have a sign on our whiteboard that some entrepreneurs notice, some don't. It's, the universal traffic signal with the red bar through it says Web 2.0, right? So this is us. We're very, very skeptical of Web 2.0 deals. And, I hate to lump it all in one bucket. But the idea, boy, God, I've been there before, that it's based on eyeballs and advertising. Certainly you can build a successful company that way because we have the proof points that you can build a successful company that way. But not all 632 companies that look exactly the same are going to be as successful, right? And so from our point of view, our ability to pick the one of the 632 that happens to get that, Mento video, or whatever it is, and whatever, social networking, video hosting, whatever. We get, these teams come in, we get really excited, it's fun, it's great, it's cool, but it's just really hard to sit down and be disciplined about it. So I would say, and what I'm hearing is more and more VCs that are increasingly skeptical of this, that are feeling, we kind of did our quota of eyeball and advertising deals for this fund. And so if you have a business model that sort of is in that line, I would strongly, strongly encourage you to figure out another source of business economics, another business model, something that people will pay for, that is, there's got to be some licensing model in there somewhere or some service model in there somewhere other than just eyeballs and advertising is what I would encourage you. Now, for all I know, you're the next Skype. I don't know, and I'm giving you really bad advice here. But I would say, on average, the likely odds are that, for these kinds of traffic and advertising-driven deals, there are 32 other companies doing pretty much the same thing, and that's going to be a real problem when it comes not only to going out there and competing in the marketplace, but convincing investors that this is a unique value proposition with a sustainable competitive advantage. So the flip side of that is, every investor, when they look at a deal, you got to spend time thinking about how is this company going to exit? What's the way in which we're going to get our money back as investors? And increasingly you can't say IPO. It's really hard for an early stage investor to imagine that any company that's two guys in a garage is going to get to an IPO within a reasonable lifetime, right? So, maybe 8, 9, 10 years from now, God bless, that's what it took Cisco, that's what it took Microsoft, that's what it took, they took 9, 10 years to go public, right? So we can't expect an IPO. That leaves, an M&A transaction or possibly a private equity transaction, a sort of emerging model for exits. But to the extent that it's, advertising and eyeballs, there are a pretty limited number of entities that are going to give you a good price for that. And basically, you got to be the winner to get a good price for that kind of business model. So, yes?
How many companies have you been involved with that went from 0 to 1 million?
How many companies have I been involved with? Well, I did buy a compact computer. So, back in the day. So, let's see. Where else do we go? But, right, the reality is that there are probably less than 20 venture-backed companies in the history of venture capital that have gone from 0 to 100 million in 5 years. So we all know that that's the rarity. So if you, I mean, I'm sort of leading the questioner here. Your comment is probably, why in the world would you expect 100 million in a financial forecast if you know they're not going to hit it? Is that your question? Right. Because the theory of the financial forecast is that we address known challenges, but we can't address unknown challenges. So as an investor and as an entrepreneur, you know there are going to be unknown challenges, but you can't cook them into your financials, because the question then says, well, why does revenue from year 2 to year 3 only go up by 5%, and then it doubles the subsequent year, right? Which is more likely to be the way the real world works. Because we had a recession, because the CEO got hit by a bus, I mean, these are all sorts of things that happen in the real world. But you're not going to cook that into a financial projection. You're not going to say, well, we're expecting the CEO to be hit by a bus in June of 2010. And so,
I've seen a lot of plans, and as soon as I see 100 million in the fifth year, I dismiss it.
well, I would, so every plan that we see that comes in that has, year 5 revenues 100 millions, and the metric behind it is 7.5%, market penetration, we dismiss. But there are lots of businesses that you can design from the bottom up that you could get to 100 million. And I agree. It's more realistic that it's going to be 40, 50, 60 million. And I think, as I said before, if you've got a nice business model, that's a perfectly fundable deal. That is a perfect, do not let me suggest to you that you shouldn't put out a financial projection unless it has 100 million in the 5th year. But if you're going after something that's interesting, there should be a way to see how, if everything goes right, you could get to 100 million. Because there are, again, 20 companies in the history of the world that managed businesses to 100 million within 5 years. So we want you to model yourself after the most successful companies in the world within the bounds of realism. May sound unfair, but that's the psychology of it. Okay? All right. So who are you with? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sort of on both sides like you.
Okay. So you're telling me that if a team came in with a really interesting idea, just because it said 100 million in the 5th year, you'd say, forget it, don't waste my time?
That's one of my biggest red flags.
Okay. I would agree. I mean, so, well, there's, and, to this point, and it's a reason this is somewhat controversial, is that in my experience, there are some VCs that are a little bit on the obsessive-compulsive side in terms of numbers. And there are some VCs who are like, I know they're lying anyway, I'm not going to waste my time. And so you may, in any given firm, much less between firms, come across very different VCs. So you'll get one VC who says to you, you ask them a question about their financial projections, and the VC will say to you, well, I don't believe them anyway, so I'm not paying attention to them. And you'll get another firm, or another VC, you ask them a question about their financial projections, and they'll look at your gross margin in year 4, and they'll compare it to year 3 and year 5, and they'll say, I don't understand exactly why the gross margin goes from here to here in year 4. And you go, oh my God, this guy's insane, right? But the purpose of that question is, do you understand the underlying economics of your business? Do you have a business understanding and a financial understanding of your business, or are you just a technologist or just a sales guy who knows how to make Excel show $100 million? So I will tell you, I'll reveal, I'm a little on the obsessive-compulsive side. My partners are a little on the what the hell side. So we have that dynamic within our own firm. I don't know. Do you guys vary, or are you all?
Yeah, no, personally, I kind of look at the first 2, maybe 3 years. But I like also to be able to squint my eyes and say, this is going to be a big business. And I guess my number would be over 50. And, but again, as we were talking about before, the bigger the fund, the more money they have to put in, the bigger multiple to pay back the fund. They're going to want the bigger opportunity that do get to the 100 million, so that you get $1 billion business.
Right. So I'm sorry, we're way past time here. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it.